right, so what I want to show today is a couple different things. Where's my effects? There we go. Just slide this into that. Okay. All right, so one of the things that you may find is that as we have this big 3D world and we have that camera, like using Sure Shot, which is what we showed last time, using Sure Shot to kind of go around to these different things, it doesn't really look like it's moving in 3D, or it doesn't really look like it's moving very far. Because once it leaves that piece of text, it's basically just like a big open area until you get to that next piece of text or the next image. So under my null here, I'm going to turn off a couple things just so this goes a bit quicker, and you'll kind of see exactly what, there we go, what is going to happen with this. And motion blur is off. There we go. Okay. As you work, try to do it a little bit efficiently. As you see something and you're like, geez, this is going super slow, is there anything I could turn off or disable or minimize that would make it go quicker? So turning motion blur off on your stuff will make your scene go quicker. You don't need to see the motion blur until the very end, basically. Or along the way, you just kind of turn it on, check it out, and then turn it off. If you're using Sure Target, not Sure Shot, Sure Target, the focus targets and the depth of field is another thing that would add to the slowness of the computer. Okay, so even this is only 30 seconds so far, and it's already going pretty slow, right? But now with this other thing, you can kind of see what else is inside the scene, where we're getting a sense of these items inside there actually moving around. Okay. The other thing we can do is right here, this is always on automatic. So right now it's set to quarter, but if it's not set to quarter and you just for some reason set it to full, lowering that could make your stuff go a little bit quicker too. At some point you have to just kind of ignore the fact that it's not going to be a pretty picture the entire time. And you have to trust that your Illustrator drawing looks like this, so when you render it out, it should look like that. Okay, obviously you can check it here or there or wherever, but you don't want to have that stuff turned on all the time. You want to really downplay it as much as you can. The other area we haven't really talked about, which is this one. See this one that has like a little dotted line here? Right now all mine are set to the slash to the right, which is like a smooth version of that image. If I click that, it'll go the other way, making all my stuff look really rough. So now it just loaded in all the stuff I have so far. So there's my name, and there's weightlifting, and there's that. So now you can see there's actually a feel for this moving around to these individual items, as opposed to before, it was just like empty space going from here to there to wherever. There's biking. All right, so I'm gonna show a couple things here. One, how do we get this stuff that's in there, okay? All of that stuff is particular. So just like before I showed using particular to create the cards, where the cards kind of flashed out, I'm doing the same thing here, but on my emitter, what I've done is I've made it a box emitter. So I'm just going to turn this off. There we go. And then I'm going to make a brand new one. So I'm going to go to trap code, I'm going to go to particular, and there it is. So right here at the origin, at the very center of my scene, that's where it's starting to emit. And as it goes, it's just emitting, right? So I just get these particles. So what I want to do is I want to create this huge container. However big my scene is, that's how big I want this box to be. And that's where all these particles are going to be coming out of. So I'm going to go to my emitter, and I choose, instead of it being a point, which is a single dot shooting particles out, I make it a box. And so now this box is going to be shooting out particles. So then I'm going to go down here to the emitter size, and I just make this as big as my scene, okay? Now this has a limit. I think it's like 2,300 and something. Nope, maybe not. All right, it doesn't have a limit. One of the items has a limit, okay? But again, you don't want to have this too big. If this is too big, basically you have one particle here and one particle like 6 miles down the road, okay? So we have to contain ourselves, because right now you see I put this to 20,000, and there's nothing inside my scene. You can't see anything inside there. So I want to keep this kind of small. So I actually limited this to maybe 5,000. And you can see as I lower my numbers, I'm starting to get more particles in the scene. Okay? So imagine this box is huge, as big as this room. If I have 100 particles inside here, it's going to be very spaced out. If I have 100 particles inside this, they're closer together. So you have to play that game, right? So I could also increase by how many particles I have here. So 500, there we go, or 1,000. Maybe it was this one has a limit. One of these things has a limit. All right. So once I had that, I looked at that and said, okay, well now it's moving like too much. I don't want the particles to be moving like crazy. I want it to look like dust in there. So then I went to my velocity and I turned this down. Okay. Now I am getting some camera wiggle from my sure shot, so let me go to my sure target. I keep saying sure shot. There we go. This I'll leave on. And where is wiggle? And I have keyframe set for some of this stuff, so I have to just scoot that keyframe down. There we go. All right, so now I'm just looking at the particles moving, okay? And so I can see, you know, do I like the way the particles are looking? You know, that actually looks like it's a pretty decent movement on there. Maybe I'll go back to my particles and just adjust some of the other properties. I also have velocity random, so maybe I don't want it to be as random. So this way the particles are pretty much moving consistently from one to the other. Okay, so again, I just kind of play with those to get them to look like I want them to look. And that's pretty much all I did for that, okay? Now as I go through, I'm checking this. There it is with technology. Okay, I'm at the piano, and the piano has no particles behind it. So what that means is that all my particles are inside this box, and my piano is way over here. So I need to make this box bigger so that I have particles in there, or I need to move piano to a smaller area. So the easiest thing to do is just to make this bigger. So maybe like 7,500. And maybe, let me see what I set it to in this other one. Oh, 19,000. So I did set this up pretty high. There we go. So now I have some particles in here. And then again, I could increase my particles per second. And that would give me more particles inside there. I can also come down to the particle here and change their size. So right now the size is 5. You can barely see some of them. I can make them bigger. I can make them going up to, like, this is 270, obviously too big. There we go. There's 71. There's 30. And again, something you could play with just to make it a little bit more apparent that they're there. Okay? And then the rest of this work came from the sure target. It came from adding my depth of field and having those focus targets on, because what it does is those particles that are close to the camera are in focus. The ones that are further away are out of focus. So then it doesn't look like we have all that stuff. It looks like there's little bits of dust or whatever in the air. So it's a very cool thing to be able to add that to your scene to give this kind of atmosphere, that it's not just this clean setup. Okay, so that's one thing you could do to add some niceness to your scene. I'm going to jump to my bike project and see how I'm organizing my stuff. So very easily I can go into each one of these comps and say, there's my bike layers, here's my finals, there's my bike final. Okay, so I'm going to show you real quick just how I did this bike rig, so that in case you have something similar. Sarcona, 2200, work. Alright, so the bike has 3 layers. It has the bike frame here, so there's all the bike frame stuff. And then it has the wheels, and each wheel is on their own layers. So there's 3 layers, the bike frame, and each wheel. Pull up my layers, you can see. There are those 3 different layers. Now what I could have done is also separated the pedals and had the pedals spinning too, but I really didn't think it was necessary in that case, okay? So I separated those 3 items. And then what I did is, let me turn these off. There it is. You'll see that this comes down and there's a little bit of a bounce. So as the bike hits the ground, the bike frame actually comes down a little bit and then jitters up. Now, in order for all of these items to work together, I needed to kind of put parenting in the forefront of this. But what happens is if I were to take the bike wheels and I parented the wheels to the frame, okay, so that the wheels would then move with the frame, and I'll do this so you can see it. I'm going to go to my bike layers. I'm just going to put this into a new composition just so you can see what this would look like. And let me make this bigger. Width. There we go. Let me change the background color. Horrible red. There we go. Alright, so this is my front wheel, so I'll just stick that here. This is the back wheel, I'll stick that there. Okay, this is just for demonstration purposes. So if I took my two wheels here, oops, bike goes on the bottom. Yes. There we go. Come on. There we go. So if I took my two wheels and I parented them, that's the wrong one, parented them to the bike, what I would get is that the bike would move the wheels, okay? And that's an acceptable thing if I'm just moving the bike itself. But what happens is when the bike hits the ground, what I want is the wheels to stay there because there's a ground, it can't go any lower, and I want the frame to jitter down. So there's no way for me to do this and have that bike frame just jitter down without moving the wheels too. So the way we get around that is we use a null. And I showed a null, I believe, last time. Okay, so I use this null object and I parent all three items to this null. Okay, so now this null, whenever I move that, it'll move all three items. But I can also move each item individually. So if I needed to, let me zoom out a touch. I hit position. You see as I move the position of that null, it's moving the position for everything. As I change this, it's changing the position of everything. So if I'm animating this bike falling straight down, I'm just going to push it above the frame and set a keyframe. I'll go into my frame. Oops, get it about there. Okay, so here it comes down and hits. I'm going to take this keyframe and make this an easy ease. I don't want this one to be an ease keyframe because it's hitting the ground. Okay, so when it hits the ground, it shouldn't like slow down and then hit the ground. I want it to hit the ground. Okay, so that one stays linear. Okay, so it looks a little bit more direct. I'm gonna pull it back a touch. There we go. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want the frame to move and kind of rotate a touch. So I'm gonna go to the bike frame itself, go to position and rotation, and just set some keyframes on that. I'm gonna just set a keyframe here. I'm gonna go up to maybe, let's say 20, set some keyframes there just to lock it in. I'm setting my start and my end at the same spot, and then I can go in the middle and tweak it. Okay, so I'm gonna go in the middle and just pull this down a touch, rotate it a touch. There we go. Then I'm gonna go up a little bit. I'm gonna pull it up a little bit more. Maybe rotate it the other way. There we go. Okay. Now, obviously this couldn't work. A bike like that wouldn't actually like work because the stuff is now broken. But visually, it looks like it could, you know, it looks bouncy. So that's all we need. So let me hit my end point here, and then we'll hit 0 so we can preview it. All right, so obviously that's not working. I need to push this up a little bit more here. There we go. And I think I need to rotate it maybe a little bit too much. Let's go to negative 1.5 there. And this I'll go to 1.5 there. And I'm going to push it down just a tad more. There we go. Okay. There we go. So now it's looking a little bit more like it's hitting the ground and kind of bouncing up. Okay. So maybe I'll take my keyframes and just bring them a little bit closer together. There we go. Okay. So now it's looking a little bit more better. And then I can turn on motion blur. Okay. Okay, and now we're getting that feel of this thing is actually like hitting the ground and kind of bouncing a little bit more tweaking, and we would, you know, a little bit tighter. But that works for this demo. Okay, so just using that null just to kind of animate these things works great. And then I could animate this thing going off screen. So then I set a keyframe here. I go up a little bit. Oops. Grab my null, pull it off screen. So now it hits, boom, and drives off. Okay? And then I can animate the wheels, because in this instance, the wheels are actually should be spinning, right? So I'm going to start the wheels spinning. So it hits the ground like this. And right about here is where I want the wheels to start spinning. So I'm going to go to my wheels, keyframe the rotation, go up a smidge like that, and then just go crazy. Okay, and then of course make sure they spin the correct direction. I didn't. All right, so that's no big deal. I just need to make these negative, so I just go like that. There we go. And then of course, motion blur on, motion blur on. And it's quick. I mean, obviously in this case the bike zips by, but you don't see it, right? The wheels look like they're spinning and it looks like it goes off. Now in my bike final here, I actually have the bike do the same thing. It bounces. I even think I animated the null moving up too. Yeah, so the null moves up a little bit too, so the wheels bounce up. And then the wheels spin, it goes back a little bit, kind of like it's like ramping up. And then zips away. And they also added particles here. You know, obviously exaggerated particles for that. And then zips away. Okay. Now getting this to work is not just a quick thing. It's not just like, you know, click a couple buttons and everything's gonna work. Just doing this one probably took me about an hour just to not draw it, but just to bring it into After Effects, animate it, tweak it, get the things to work the way I wanted them to work. So here's a couple things I had to play with. So for my particles, I didn't want to animate my point, because on our particles we have a position. Okay, so this is where our particles are emitting from. So I wanted that emission point to be right from the base of the tire. So I had to move it down there, but I didn't want to just animate it manually here and then there. So I did that trick of using the expression to control it. Okay. So I went in there and let me disable this one and make a new one. Effect, particular, there we go. Okay, so here's where it started right here. Just whee. Not what we want. So I went to my emitter and I said that this position should be where the particles are starting, or where the tire is. Okay, so when it comes down and hits right about here, that's where that should be. So roughly about there. Okay, that's about where I want this to start. But then it doesn't go. It doesn't move along with it. Now if I were to take this and I parented this to the null, let me bring it back a bit. And in this one I just called the null animated bike. You can see it doesn't look like the particles are actually on their own. It looks like the particles are just kind of like in a group moving with it. Okay, so in this case parenting doesn't work. So what I had to do, and there's my other particular, is on this emitter here I had to tell the X and Y position that I want it to follow the null. Okay, so I'm gonna just option click on that, and let me open this position up, and I'm just going to drag this little handle to this. Okay, so then that's going to take the position of the null and parent it to that. So now you'll see it moves with the bike and it actually looks like it's trailing it. It looks like it's kind of following the bike. But the issue is now it's not lined up right. Right? Now it's coming from the center, even though I had it lined up right to that back tire. So here's where we get into the expression stuff, is that we're going to take this, and right now it's getting the information from the other layer. So that's all it's doing, is just saying, you know, take these numbers and put them here. So what we want to do is say, take these numbers and put them here, but I still want to be able to tweak the position of it afterwards, like actually where it's at. So I'm going to say plus these numbers here. Okay, so I use my pick whip, drug it to there. And so now what it's going to do is it's going to allow me to manipulate it. So right now you'll see it's going crazy. It's like way off. Okay, but now I can move these. Before I couldn't move this. It wouldn't have allowed me to move this. It would have just offset it back to where it was. So now I can move this where I want it to come from. That's a perfect sound effect too. Okay, so now the particles are actually coming off of that back tire, so it seems like it's coming off that back tire. All right, so now we still have the Z, because the Z is obviously something different. So I'll go down to my Z, I alt click there, I pick whip up here. There it is. I'm just going to drag that, and then I'm just going to add plus the pick whip for this one. Okay. Now I'm not expecting you to be masters of expressions or masters of this kind of stuff. A lot of this is, I want it to do this, how do I get it to do that? And it's playing with it and trying different things until you get it to do what you want it to do. So here, this looks pretty much the same. And now it's actually going back there. Now there is an issue where it rotates around right here, where now it's in the front. So I set a keyframe. I went to this, and I did this when it was out of frame. I said right there it's good, so we'll just set a keyframe here. I'm going to come up a little bit, and I'm going to pull it back in the X. There we go. And then I can just shuffle this back here. So now it comes down, and now it's still trailing at the back of the bike. Okay? And then the other thing that I had to do was, obviously I don't want this to start right on the frame. That doesn't make sense. I want it to start right when it hits, like right, or when the wheels start going, like right about there. Okay? So I turned my emission off. I set a keyframe. I went up a frame, and then I can just set this to like 500. And then there it goes. Okay? And then these are just points. That's the kind of particles these are. So if I come down to my particle, I change this from, sphere. If I change this from sphere to clouds, then I'll get these little puffy popcorn kernels. And then I can make the popcorn kernels bigger by going to this. Oops, that's too big. There we go. I can make their size random, so they're all not the same exact size. I can make their opacity random, and also knock the opacity down some because they're all really opaque. And eventually I'll get to the point where this is actually starting to look like clouds, where it's starting to look like dust. Okay? The color, I can do it from a gradient. And if I go to my color over life, which is what this is, it's using this gradient as a way to kind of pick the coloring. So if I choose this, you'll see that nothing happens. Again, it's a kind of a glitch inside of After Effects. I save, I reboot, I go back into it, and I would have this black to white grayscale image of these particles being colored. Why it does it, who knows? Okay, I'm not going to reboot just because we can see it. All right, so again, we just kind of play with it until we're happy with the results of our stuff. Now, one of the things I had to do to get this whole thing to work correctly is, let me drop this final bike comp, this. I'm just going to put this into a new layer, not number 2, number 1. Okay, so here's my bike doing that. And then I say, okay, well, you know, my motion blur isn't working on this, so I'm going to turn my motion blur on and turn it on. Okay, and that's going to work. So now I can see this thing doing that. Cool. But then what I want to also happen is, this isn't a 3D layer, right? So I can't actually place this anywhere in 3D because it just won't happen. So I need to put this into a 3D. I need to hit position, and I need to move it wherever. Okay, so let's say I move this way back here or whatever. All right, so there we go, like that. Now you'll see that this comes in. So you see how my bike is actually getting like cut off right there? What's happening is it's reading my comp was right here. Your comp is cut off. So I want to tell After Effects to ignore that. I say, don't pay attention to the comp size, just let it be shown. So if I click this continuously rasterize collapse transformations button right here, it'll do that, okay? And so now, even though it's not on frame, it does that. But what happens is I've lost some of my stuff, okay? My particles are no longer following that either. Okay, it used to be like lined up pretty perfectly, but now it's not. So if I go here, it's lined up good. I go here, it's not, okay? So it's actually an issue with particles, those particles not actually being 3D. So again, there's nothing I can do to make those work correctly. All I can do is work around the problem, find another solution to it. So here's what I did, is I created two compositions. I have bike final, let me delete bike final 3 just so we don't get confused. So bike final is the one that we just looked at. It's everything that's in here, just like that. And then bike final 2 is just the particles with my word biking in it, okay? So one of these will actually be like a 3D motion blurred layer, the other one will not. And so if I go to my final comp, you'll see that I actually have two here. This one and that one. So this one, I can have the motion blur, I can have the 3D layer. Okay? This one is just my wording. Okay, because I didn't need motion blur plus a 3D layer on it. Okay? It is a 3D layer, but it's not motion blurred. Where the other one is motion blurred and it's 3D layered. Okay? So just stuff to be aware of as we start working on these things, that you're going to run into troubles. You're going to run into things that are not working like you think they should, and it's just a matter of kind of working around these type of elements, okay? And then just one more thing I'm going to show, which is these words here, my weightlifting, my drawing, my reading, my technology. I can be pretty lazy sometimes, so I didn't want to actually find a spot in space for these words to be. So I wrote an expression for them, and this is the one that should have worked the other day but did not work. Okay, word. So I'm going to paste it here so you can see it. So what this is doing, and this is essentially what it's doing, is it's basically saying make 3 random numbers and then assign them to X, Y, and Z. Okay. So we have an X, Y, Z position for every item. So I want 3 random numbers, and I want it to randomly position this in that random spot. That's all that's doing, okay? So let's look at this again. This is basically saying don't give me a random number every single frame, because it would do that. Every frame, I go to frame 1 and give me 3 random numbers. Go to frame 2, I get 3 new ones. Go to frame 3, 3 new ones. So your item would actually like jump around. We don't want that. Okay, so give me 1 set of random numbers for the entire comp. Here's my X. This is where it's going to store the value. Okay, so it has to store the random number somewhere, so just storing it inside the X. So I'm saying give me a random number between -1000 and +1000. And then round it off. Okay, that's all the rounding does here. And what the rounding does is instead of having 95.3872649. Stupid, we don't need that. Just make it rounded off to the nearest number. Okay, so it does the same thing for X, for Y, and for Z. And then down here, I'm just assigning it to the X, Y, and Z position of that item. Okay, so the X position for this weightlifting one is whatever that random number turned out to be. You can see it's 771. -64 and -641. And if I go to this reading one and I hit position, those 3 random numbers are that. If I go to drawing, those 3 random numbers are that. So for each one of these layers, it gets 3 random numbers. And what's cool about it is it's dynamic. So if I were to duplicate this layer and I looked at that position, you'll see those positions are different. Okay, so what's cool about that in not necessarily just this specific comp, but let me make a new comp real quick. Sure. Oops. There's a little bit of a lag apparently. So I'm going to go to a solid here, and I'm just going to make this like, I don't know, 100 by 100. There we go. So if I go into this position, and I'm going to do the same thing, seed random. 0 just means like give me a number, and then false. Or true. Every program has a different way of syntaxing things. True, there we go. And then I'm going to say x equals a random number between 0 and 1280. Y equals a random number between 0 and 720. And then I'm just going to say x, comma, y. Okay, so right now he has a random position on that sheet. But then watch what happens when I duplicate him. So very quickly I can populate this entire screen with a bunch of random objects randomly positioned. Now here's where we can take this a step further, is that I can also do this for scale. Okay, so I'll do the same thing. Seed random, 0, comma, true. And then I'll say scale value, and this is just a made-up word. You can call it whatever you want. Is a random number between, let's say, 20% and 150%, because that's what the scale values are set to, percentages. So then I just go bracket, scale val, comma, scale val, close it, that. Okay. So now we get a random scale of this specific item. And again, I duplicate it, and now I'm going to get different sized shapes. And I could duplicate this 1,000 times and basically fill this entire screen with all these randomly sized, randomly positioned shapes. And then we could take it even a step further and do stuff like rotation. And the expression is the same. Seed random, 0 true, end semicolon at the end of each line. Rand rotation equals a random number between negative 360 and positive 360. And then I just put rand rot there. Okay. Now this one is only one value. Scale is 2 values, right? X and Y. And then position is 2 values, X and Y. So they need brackets. Rotation is only 1 value, so he doesn't need brackets. And I'm going to change my scale on this one. I'm going to edit that expression and make it even bigger, like 250. There we go. All right. So now, again, I duplicate it, and I get these things that are randomly rotated, positioned, and scaled throughout my comp. And then again, we go a step further. And this is how your learning happens, is you just kind of see, like, what else can we do with this? If I go to my hue and saturation, and I look at this and say, okay, well, this isn't coloring anything, but what happens if I hit colorize? There we go. So now this is going to colorize stuff. I'll make it a little bit brighter. Maybe not that bright. Make it a little more saturated. Okay. So now if I isolate this attribute, so this is colorize hue, and I alt-click it, and I write my expression on there. Random, 0 true, rand rotation, it's called random hue, equals a random number between 0 and 360. Rand hue, there we go. Okay, so what this is going to do now is it's going to pick a random color, basically. So when I duplicate it, you can see we get this huge array. They're randomly positioned, they're randomly scaled, they're randomly rotated, and they're randomly chosen a color. Now I could isolate this even further and just do this like in a black and white, randomize the lightness, and then colorize this afterwards, or do whatever. Okay? This is where it really opens the abilities of you as an artist to be able to do stuff much quicker. Imagine if I told you to make that. How long would it take you to make that? Right? To randomly yourself pick a color, pick a scale, pick a rotate, pick a position. And then the last bit of this is that I've only done this in X and Y. We haven't even touched 3D. But again, we could explore that 3D realm and rotate it this way and rotate it that way and rotate and scale and do all this other stuff. Okay? The door is open. It's just a matter of getting in there and just kind of playing with it. And with this minuscule expression, you can do a whole lot of stuff and make your life a lot easier. And this will take you further than just this kind of thing. We haven't even really talked about it, but there's this program called ExtendScript right here. That's an external program that patches into Photoshop, that patches into After Effects, that patches into Illustrator and InDesign and Lightroom. It allows you to do this kind of thing not only with your one file, but with millions of files if you needed. So think of your photo catalog. How many times have you gone through a picture and said, geez, I wish all these ones that are rotated this way were automatically rotated that way? You know, you could write a script that would automatically do that. Not a big deal going one at a time if you're on your own dime, but when you're working for someone else, they want it done as quick as possible. Okay? So, I would write that down, or when you're in the video, you're watching it, save it somewhere, and use that. You know, just play with it. See what else you can come up with. I've made lots of cool things just by doing that exact expression. If you get into using 3D, we do the same kind of stuff in 3D where we're writing these little expressions using this kind of formatting. Okay?